Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can.
Spider-Man Far From Home is a fantastic and confusing conclusion to the Infinity Saga. Now, I've watched just about every Marvel movie to date, and Homecoming is very near and dear to my heart.
Hey! You're that Spider guy on YouTube, right? Call me Spider-Man! Okay, Spider-Man! Don't flip! Yeah!
But Far From Home may very well have just blown that one out of the water, possibly literally. So I did this for Captain Marvel, a film that, upon watching again, I largely feel the same towards, and I figured I'd do a quick you should go see video for the Spider-Boy here. I want to mention real quick that I didn't do one of these for Endgame simply because everyone and their mother was going to see that movie, since Marvel decided to basically try and DMCA the entire internet when it came to spoilers, and nobody really wanted to be left out. But that movie was fun, fan service heavy, and you know, it's the penultimate thing, whatever. But for me, it totally should have been the conclusion to this part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, before I get into that, I gotta talk about Spider-Man. And what can I say other than this movie was just fantastic? I'm gonna do like I did with Detective Pikachu and talk about as much of this movie as I can before dropping spoilers, at which time I'll leave a nice little time code to visit for those of you who haven't seen this yet, because man, are there some spoilers in this one.
Stop watching because there's
yeah,
some
I
serious
know, that's
spoilers
what I
about to
just...
come up.
The film opens with an in memoriam bit from Midtown High School's news team. You know, these two from the first movie. After they give a sort of memorial for Tony, Cap, Vision, and Black Widow, they give a quick little catch-up about how all the kids who were dusted, now called the Blip, returned 5 years later and have to essentially redo high school. This conveniently includes Peter, Ned, Flash, MJ, and a few other familiar faces from the last movie, as well as a new kid named Brad, played by Remy He, who actually himself wasn't dusted, but was a scrawny little kid who's now 5 years older, and who sort of acts as the romantic rival for Peter throughout the film. The film has them all going to Europe for a school field trip, and during said field trip, we see Nick Fury hijack said field trip, so Peter can be in the same places as him to help face off against the Elementals, a group of powerful deity-like dudes that ripped off Avatar's whole shtick, fighting against newcomer Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. The class travels to Venice, Prague, and more European countries as Peter tries to hide the fact that he's Spider-Man, deal with the Elementals alongside Fury and Mysterio, try and tell MJ how he feels, and deal with the fact that everyone seems to think he's going to be the next Iron Man. Now, everything about this film is phenomenal. From the visual effects, to the writing, to the performances by just about everyone, and in general, it probably is going to be up there as one of my top 10 favorite MCU films. Tom Holland is in peak Spider-Man mode, easily portraying the conflicted Peter Parker who feels obligated to help those around him, but also just kinda wants to ask out a girl. Jacob Batalon is fun as always as Ned, Zendaya is a fantastic choice for MJ, and everyone else does some pretty damn good jobs portraying their respective roles. The writing in this movie is fantastic, with some pretty great jokes thrown in for good measure. One of the things I loved about Homecoming was the less quippy nature of the humor, making it feel really grounded and a lot of the time sounding like things actual people would say instead of just constant one-liners. That mentality returns for this one, with a few good running gags to boot. Like, there's a bit about how JB Smooth's character keeps thinking that the only possible conclusion as to what the Elementals are is that they're a concoction by witches or something. And in my book, that is A+ joke writing. Overall, I think this is a great film, but I do have one or two problems with it, most notably the legacy of Tony Stark thing that they're going for. A lot of the conflict for Peter stems from people around him, including Happy and Nick Fury, basically trying to pressure him into being the next Iron Man. And I gotta say that they are really trying to push this whole thing with how Tony was basically the Christ of this world. Now, I am eternally grateful that the first Iron Man was as good as it was, simply because it means we get the rest of the MCU as we know it. But to me, the relationship between Peter and Tony wasn't fleshed out enough. I would have liked it if we had maybe one or two more films where they're fleshing out the dynamic before we got something like this, but even with what little we got between them, they're really pushing this whole new Iron Man angle and kind of forcing it onto Spider-Man. It's even one of the pivotal parts of the plot of this film.
You got gifts, Parker, but you have a job to do. Are you going to step up or not?
And that part's a little spoilery, so I'm just gonna hold on to that pin for a moment. The other problem I have is more of a marketing thing, but this one's being claimed as the final film in the Infinity Saga. But considering how this movie ends, it doesn't really feel like the conclusion I think they wanted it to be. Endgame, for all its fan service and forced moments of joy and rapture and whatnot, was honestly a way better ending for this part of the MCU, and Far From Home feels more like an epilogue for Peter, if anything. Now, I am obviously going to have to start talking about spoilery things, since it's really hard to talk about this movie without spoiling stuff. So, if you do not want this movie spoiled, I highly recommend you skip to the time code on screen. I'm not kidding. I am about to spoil the whole dang thing, after credit scenes and all. If you're okay with that, keep watching. But if you're not, skip ahead to my final thoughts. Alright, so Mysterio's change to a bad guy was kind of obvious for a while now, at least to me. The film is obviously taking inspiration from Amazing Spider-Man number 212, so I kind of basically knew what we were getting into from the get-go, and that he was going to end up being the bad guy and all that. But how they managed to do it in this film was honestly just freaking genius. Not only is Jake Gyllenhaal's performance pitch perfect for what I would have wanted from this universe Mysterio to be, but tying him and a couple of other characters, like the guy who somehow got access to the drones and stuff, into the past films was kind of a neat little surprise. And yeah, it might seem like a little bit of a cop-out to give them a bit of a villain backstory, but it genuinely works here. If he had just shown up and was this special effects artist like he was in the comics without any ties to Tony or anything that came before, it would have felt really off, especially since they wanted this to be, again, the penultimate film in the Infinity Saga. Plus, they really like tying things together when it comes to the MCU, so it kind of makes a lot of sense why they would do it. I'm really glad that they decided to have him turn into the villain in the end, simply because all of the trailers were focusing so much on a narrative of, oh no, he's totally a good guy. Look at him. He gets along with Peter and everything. He's so nice, you guys. You can trust us. If they'd stuck with the whole thing, like him being good, I probably would have found it really jarring for a lot of reasons, but mainly because of what Captain Marvel did just a couple months ago. The Skrulls being good guys in that film was one of the best parts of that movie, but having a twist where two characters switch sides from what they were in the comics this close together would have been potentially too predictable and kind of come off as lazy story writing. Granted, him staying the villain was kind of predictable given the character's history, but at least it makes sense for the story provided. The Skrulls was a nice subversion, but I'm curious to see what they're going to do with that going forward. More on that in a sec. His performance was so good in this movie that I was really sad that he had to die. There's an easy way they could, make him not be dead, but I kind of hope they don't. One of Homecoming's strengths was that the only death in the whole film was played off as a joke, with Michael Keaton's character not being the death. They didn't kill off the major villain, but in this one, it kind of works a little bit better with the narrative they're going for. I really want to see how Beck's death affects Peter. And given what he's going to have to deal with next, I hope they acknowledge this whole thing going forward. Speaking of Peter's future, I'm extra surprised that they were willing to pull the whole Spider-Man versus the public thing in the first end credit scene. It's a narrative that they've used in the comics before to great success, fueled once again by J. Jonah Jameson with the return of J.K. Simmons, but for the film to effectively end with that felt like a really strange choice. To end with that as a cliffhanger really felt off-putting. As for the other end credit scene, I think a lot of people kind of called it that Nick Fury would be a Skrull after Captain Marvel. Showing us that Fury was basically been on a vacation for however long was a nice little touch, but when they pan out and show that he's on a Skrull space station or whatever, I instantly had the thought that we're going to get a Secret Invasion story arc in the future. And I'm just eager to see how they managed to pull that one off as they did, especially given the fact that they have the Skrulls being nice guys now. So yeah, the film is great. It has a whole lot of spoilery stuff to it, and I still find it odd that it's the end of the Infinity Saga. Like I said, Endgame is a way better conclusion, and this feels like an epilogue for Spider-Man. But overall, I don't really see this as the end of the 10 plus years of content we've gotten thus far. This should have been the beginning of the new saga, considering the ending that I won't spoil here simply because I did that a few minutes ago in the spoiler section of the video. But from a marketing standpoint, I really get it. We don't know what or when the next film will be in the MCU, and we're likely not going to get one until the middle of next year. Sure, we know we're getting like Doctor Strange 2, Captain Marvel 2, and whatever, but making this the ending only really makes sense from that marketing standpoint, simply because the film doesn't really deliver on that promise. Regardless, it's still a fun film, guys, that I really think y'all should see. Just about everything in the film had me smiling the whole time, and I can't wait to see how this film's conclusion affects things going forward. If you want a rating, I'll give it a 9 out of 10, but in general, I just really like it. Go and see it for yourself and see what I mean. But in the meantime, while I've got you here, I want to announce something kind of fun. Since Far From Home is technically considered the end of the Infinity Saga, I thought I'd do something fun to celebrate the last 10 plus years of the MCU. My first thought was a big review series of videos talking about all the movies in the MCU, since right now I only really have 2 films sort of reviewed, but there are plenty of people who already did that. Most notably for me, the Cosmonaut Variety Hour. And I don't want to just copy them. So, I naturally came to the next logical conclusion. Review every movie Marvel has ever made. Starting hopefully sometime next month, I'll be uploading a series of videos reviewing every Marvel film ever released to theaters. Starting with Howard the Duck and ending with Far From Home, since by the time I get back around to it, it'll likely have been out on DVD for a bit and I can use footage from it without worrying about copyright strikes, I'm going to review every major motion picture release that had Marvel's name on it, and even a few that I decided to throw in because I want to just torture myself. If you thought a series talking about 20 plus films was a big task, I'm about to make myself tackle 60. So like, subscribe, and all that jazzy YouTube stuff to see when that drops, and pray for me as I sit through such gems as Howard the Duck, Elektra, Fantastic Four, and Dark Phoenix. I hope you'll enjoy it, since there's a good chance I might not enjoy the whole shebang. But for now, just go see Spider-Man Far From Home, and I will see you all in the next video.